Joined now on the Emerald Queen Casino Sportsbook Hotline by Seahawks Draft Blog's Rob Staten. Rob, I thought that this game against the Arizona Cardinals would be a little more closer fought than was the game against the Commanders. And yet for a second consecutive week, the Seahawks got off to a 28-0 start, and this one fell over in the first half. When you watch these two games, still, even though high scoring, kind of different strengths in them, what do you see in terms of offense? What's really keeping them rolling?
What I see is that the question, can you win a game in the first quarter? The answer is obviously, actually, yes, you can. They've started doing that a couple of times now. Do you know what I thought about this game more than any other? It was hard to watch the NFL on Sunday, the early games, and see what was happening to the Buffalo Bills in Miami, knowing what had happened to the Packers against the Panthers, what had happened to the Lions against the Vikings. The Saints were winning in Carolina, and I was going into this game thinking, I'm quite nervous. The Seahawks, are they going to have their version of this? Are they going to have their upset game? And then in no time at all, it was 35-0, and the game was over, and we could just relax and enjoy it. So I thought it was a fantastic performance, and it's really difficult when you are that far ahead very early in the game to then play another 3 quarters of football. So what kind of happened after that and some of the issues doesn't really worry me much at all. I think the offense was not required to do as much because the defense scored a couple of touchdowns. Everything just seems to be moving like a freight train at the moment, and long may it continue. I think this is a great game to have next to sort of see as a gauge as to just how good this team is.
You mentioned it moving like a freight train, and that's kind of a common thread with the previous Super Bowl teams here in Seattle, where all 3 years there were games like we saw on Sunday and games like we saw the previous Sunday against Washington and games like we saw against New Orleans. At what point are you maybe looking at this team through the lens of this could be a season similar to what we've seen in years past when this team's really going?
Well, whether it's the right thing to do or not, I've already started thinking that way. Because when you look at the standings and you see Seahawks, number 1 seed in the NFC, which was what was the situation before the Eagles won against the Packers, you can't help but get caught up in that because the Seahawks have been in the playoff mix for a number of years and been there or thereabouts, but they've not been number 1. They've not been the top of the tree in the NFC. And if you are going to be in that contention, why not dream of Super Bowls? Why not dream of what is possible? Who could watch that game yesterday, that really awful game in Green Bay, and think, yeah, these teams are miles better than the Seahawks? They're not. They're definitely not. So the Niners are so injured. The Lions, really good at the best, beatable when they're not at the best. It feels as if I think the whole of the NFL is going to be looking at this game against the Rams and thinking, we're going to find out who the NFC favorites are this weekend. And I just would love the Seahawks to go and win this game because the Eagles made a bit of a statement just by, not by the performance, but just by beating Green Bay in Green Bay. And the Bills made a bit of a statement when they beat the Chiefs, albeit then getting hammered by the Dolphins the following week. If the Seahawks could go and win against the Rams in LA, they would be declaring to the whole of the world, we mean business. We can be in the Super Bowl this year.
Feels like Sam Darnold is central to that point, too. Curtis made a point earlier in our show that the Rams were the team that knocked Sam Darnold out of the playoffs. They were one of 2 teams to beat the Vikings last year and did it twice, obviously once in the postseason. And, you know, I've seen some people push back against that, saying, well, Sam Darnold's been fantastic. He's no worse than Matthew Stafford. But I think that you can simultaneously be a Seahawks fan and still feel as though you just want it proven. You just want to see it from Sam. Is that how you feel about it?
I'm pretty relaxed about it because this week I did a bit of research on that game between the Vikings and the Rams. And it's easy to forget that Sam Darnold was sacked 9 times in that game. He was sacked 9 times. And then he was pressured 27 times on dropbacks in that game. And if you actually look at Matt Stafford and Lamar Jackson, they played 2 playoff games. They were pressured, I think, 28 and 29 times, respectively, in their 2 playoff games. So Sam Darnold had as many pressures as they had in 2 games in 1 game. So twice as many pressures. And then if you actually look at, there is a statistic on PFF which shows how responsible a quarterback was for the pressures. How much have they brought it on themselves? and his pressure rate was 8th amongst quarterbacks in the playoffs last year. So amongst all of the players that were playing and creating the pressures, he was 8th. It was something like 16% of the pressures. So when you actually think about it, that Rams game was more on a bad offensive line for Minnesota than Sam Darnold. Not to say he was totally blameless, but look at what the Vikings did in the offseason. They spent a lot of money on Will Fries. They spent a lot of money on Ryan Kelly. And then they spent a first-round pick on another guard as well. So they clearly were pinning a lot of responsibility for that performance on their guards and center. And yes, they did not re-sign Sam Darnold, and they're probably cursing themselves for that decision now. But I'm going to give Sam Darnold the benefit of the doubt here. I think he was more to blame for the Lions' mistakes in the previous game at the end of the regular season, and not so much the Rams. And I think he's going to go out in this game and show that behind a better offensive line, he can get the job done against this opponent.
Is there something you think people fundamentally misunderstand about Darnold? Because while you're saying that, I'm thinking, first of all, Rob, that's great research, and not surprising at all that you did your research and did some digging at all. That's why we have you on. But I'm thinking like, well, these stats were available for people months and months and months ago, and yet that game probably cost Sam Darnold not only staying in Minnesota, but millions of dollars in free agency. Do you think that there's some kind of narrative that persists about Darnold? Why do you think that's there? Or in your opinion, what's just something people might fundamentally misunderstand about Sam?
Yes, I think there was a narrative that when you are a quarterback who fails, like he did as the 3rd overall pick in New York, even when a player has a good year, as he did, he had 35 touchdowns for the Vikings in the regular season last year. They won 14 games. There's a level of suspicion that does not exist for a top 10 pick who just, with the original team that drafted them, just goes on and has a whole bunch of success, like Mahomes or Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson or Joe Burrow. So people were waiting for the moment when they could go, yeah, do you know what? He's still the same player who was with the Jets. So there's a little bit of that going on. And then perhaps specifically with the Seahawks as well, Geno Smith, for whatever reason, was incredibly popular with quite a cliquey group online, if we're being honest. And when he was traded to the Raiders, a lot of people were unhappy about that and didn't understand the process. And Sam Darnold, as the replacement, has got caught up a little bit in that. It's like, how could he possibly be better than Geno Smith? You know, this guy's a top 10 quarterback. And yet he's come to Seattle and just carried on what he was doing last season. So now you've got a season and a half of sustained success with Sam Darnold. But those people, again, who maybe want to damage limitation a little bit their viewpoints on why that was a huge mistake in March, and now probably going to point to those two games and say, well, look what happened with the Lions and look what happened with the Rams. We need to see Sam Darnold do it against the Rams this weekend, or we need to see him win a playoff game, or we need to see him win the NFC West to truly buy into this. But I think we have to say now, there's a body of evidence, even going back to his time with the Carolina Panthers, that Sam Darnold is a good quarterback. The New York Jets are a terrible organization, and that's the reason why he failed in New York.
Rob, we've looked at the matchup between Darnold and the Rams, but on the other side of the ball, Mike Macdonald is a defensive genius, and this Rams offense is going to present a challenge for him. Where are the opportunities for the Seahawks defense this week against the Rams?
I think the big opportunity is to show they can cover a tight end. That'd be quite nice, because you better believe that the Rams are going to go after that. I mean, Trey McBride had the freedom of Seattle last weekend. Now, it didn't really matter because the game was over. And, you know, as somebody who has Trey McBride in 3 of my fantasy teams, I was happy that they were very generous with the yards and the touchdown that they allowed him to have. But they're going to have to get an angle on that. Like, this is not the first time it has happened. So this is an opportunity now to sort of work out a plan, because you look at what Stafford was doing with the tight ends in the last game against the Niners. Like, he will attack that area. They will get those quick passes out to the tight ends. That is, if you are going to be creative with your pressures, but not do it with blitzing, which tends to be Seattle's modus operandi, then they're going to find those quick passes, and it is often going to be involved to the tight end. So that's the big opportunity. I think the other thing you've got to do is you've got to get that early pressure. Like, Stafford is a player who, if you allow him the time to sit in the pocket, he is going to make big plays. He's going to find Devontae Adams. He's going to find Puka Nacua, as well as those tight ends. You have got to get to the quarterback. And the other thing the Seahawks are going to have to do is they're going to have to create a bit of scoreboard pressure themselves. They are going to have to score some points and put pressure on this Rams team. I think it's a fascinating game. And you've got an offensive genius in Sean McVay. You've got a defensive genius in Mike Macdonald. You can't ask for anything more. This is the perfect game to have this weekend, and all eyes are going to be on this game. And I just hope that the Seahawks come out with a win in the end, because that is what, I mean, just imagine what next week is going to be like if the Seahawks win this game. Like the euphoria amongst the fans, the national and international attention the Seahawks are going to get if they win this game. It's going to be something that's going to have people wondering what is possible for the rest of the year.
Well, think about the rest of the year, too. I mean, the hardest opponents remaining on the schedule would be in back-to-back weeks with the Colts, I think, on a Sunday, and then the Rams on a Thursday, right? So in that short week, you have those two opponents. Other than that, you still have to play the Titans. The Vikings are on your schedule. The Falcons are on your schedule. I'm not saying that either of those two previous teams, maybe not the Titans, but I'm not saying that either of those two teams can't give a team headaches, on a good day. But outside of Indy, which has suddenly sprouted some questions, still a very good team, and the Rams, who we know are a very good team, there's a world where Curtis and I were talking about it. Seattle could finish with 12 wins, 12 plus wins.
It's very possible. And the worst thing about the NFL is that just as you start to sort of project that kind of thing, it can sort of pop you on the nose. Like, who knows? who knows what injuries are a big thing in the NFL. Like often it is who is the healthiest good team going into the playoffs that will have the best chance, and that's what the Seahawks have to hope happens. Touch wood, there's not going to be any sort of significant injuries. They've had some recently, so hopefully there's not going to be any more of that. But they need to stay healthy, and as I mentioned, this is the weirdest NFL season I can remember. Like it is such a unique season that the Super Bowl favorites are currently 5-4. They're not a lock to make the playoffs. I mean, they probably are because of Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. But when's the last time a 5-4 team with the Super Bowl favorites at this stage of the season? And anything can happen. Like the Seahawks could beat the Rams and lose to the Titans. Like that's just, you have to be careful with sort of overlooking these teams. That's what the Bills presumably did against the Dolphins. But the chance is there, isn't it? The chance is there. If we've seen it, Seattle has only ever been to the Super Bowl when they've been the number one seed in the NFC. And although maybe that will be different this year because they are road warriors, they can go and win on the road to the extent that they've shown so far. Maybe it would even benefit them not to have the number one seed for that, to be able to go on the road and win some of these games. But if they can get up to 12, 13 wins, they're going to be one of the teams to watch. And I just think it's been a long time since you've been afforded the opportunity to think this team could have a serious playoff run. Not just get there and then be losing the wild card respectively. To get there and to be a team that can do some damage. And it'd be a great thought if in the next few weeks they could confirm that.
Rob, the stars are playing like stars for the Seahawks. Obviously, Darnold, JSN, the big names, but they're also getting great contributions from guys like Ty Okada in relief of Julian Love. Drake Thomas has filled in admirably at the linebacker spot. What have you made of some of those unsung guys stepping into these bigger roles and not seeing any sort of drop-off from the defensive side of the ball?
I think it's to the players' credit, first and foremost, that they've all shown major improvement. Like from Ty Okada's first starting relief to Julian Love to where he's playing now. Same with Drake Thomas when he first started getting reps earlier in the year to what he's showing now. Like, first of all, you've got to give the players a lot of credit. But doesn't it just speak to this staff and what a great job they're doing as well? Because with the greatest respect, we all love Pete Carroll. It feels like we shouldn't have to say this. But I think towards the end of his tenure, we weren't quite seeing that. When star players were missing, if they were to lose a Julian Love and Ernest Jones, you wouldn't necessarily bank on the replacement being somebody like an undrafted free agent who would come in and then elevate their performance over 3 or 4 weeks. We're definitely seeing that now. And Mike Macdonald, the defensive backs coach, is in case of Okada, the linebackers coach is Adam Dirty, whoever else is involved. Like, you are seeing these players just get better and better every single week. And you are going to lose players in the season, and it's probably going to further happen. We've just seen it with Jaron Reed. And the defensive tackles who step up to the plate against the Cardinals perhaps wasn't the biggest test given what happened in that game, but they did an admirable job based on what we can judge them on. And you just feel so confident that when they are going to lose players, that whether it's for 2 weeks or whether it's for 6 weeks, the players who are going to step up to the plate can come and fill in. And that's where you want to be. That's what Kyle Shanahan's done all year with the 49ers, because they've lost some players. The Seahawks have done it as well with Mike Macdonald and some of these defenders.
I want to get back to your point about just believing that not only could a team get to the Super Bowl, but it could win. I completely agree with you. Not only is this the most complete Seahawks team I can remember in some time. In fact, the first time since 2015 that they've been a top 5 offensively and defensively. But league-wide, I look around and I go, I think that they could beat them. I think they could beat them. There's not a clear team. We've talked a lot about the NFC, though, maybe because of that Monday night matchup. But when you look at the AFC, you joked about the Chiefs kind of being still a Super Bowl favorite. Is there a team where you go, that's a tough matchup, would be curious to see where that is? Or would you be able to make a case that the Seahawks are the best team in the league?
I think anytime you play one of these truly elite quarterbacks, you're worried. I mean, whenever you'd play, if Lamar Jackson's healthy, we know what Lamar Jackson can do. Patrick Mahomes is just a sort of force and always will be until he retires. And Josh Allen looked pretty bad against the Dolphins, but that might spur him on to get back to his best after this. So I think anytime you're playing those teams, even if the Bengals found a way to sneak in, if you were playing look at the way Joe Burrow finished last season. Like if they sneaked in somehow and all of a sudden you were playing Joe Burrow, even though the Bengals defense, it looks like they're playing with about 5 players on the field. Like offensively, they've got so many weapons and he would be a great quarterback. So they are the teams that you would fear, but that's the great thing about being in the NFC at the moment. Like you will not have to play any of those players in the playoffs. Like it would not be unrealistic to think you'd have to go through a gauntlet of Lamar, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes just to get to the Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. And as the Eagles showed last year, you don't have to do any of that. You just have to play them in the Super Bowl, and then you get 2 weeks to prepare for it. And even Patrick Mahomes coming up against a balanced Eagles defense that was a roster without many flaws, didn't have the elite quarterback. No disrespect to Jalen Hurts. He's not Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes and Lamar. But because they didn't have the flaws and because their game plan was good and because they he'd executed well, maybe had a bit of luck along the way as that game spiraled, that game against the Chiefs in the Super Bowl looked a lot like the Seahawks' last couple of games against the Commanders and the Cardinals. So if you are in the NFC and you would get to the Super Bowl, and I mean, we're looking so far ahead here, but you were playing Mahomes or an Allen, you would say, I'm really interested to see what Mike Macdonald's going to cook up here, and you would believe that you have a chance. I do not think the Seahawks currently are the best team in the NFL. If they beat the Rams next week, I might give you a different answer.
Rob, you are one of our favorite people covering this team, and we look forward to talking to you every single week, but something about next week in our interview with you makes me very, very excited because we are going to have a monumental game to recap. So we'll talk to you then.
Yeah, I hope I've got a big smile on my face next week.
Fingers crossed. Thank you, Rob.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.